How's it going, everybody? Thank you for joining. Wait for some more people to get in. I appreciate you guys tuning in tonight on SoCal Kayak Anglers Lockdown Live. This is Ep.4. We're going to be talking about lipless crankbaits. Lots and lots of things to discuss about lipless crankbaits. We can go into extreme detail, which I plan on doing to the best of my ability. Unfortunately, tonight, no one wanted to join me, but we'll get into that later. All right, so before we get started, let you guys know there's always a delay on the feed no matter what I do. So you guys are always about 30 seconds behind me, so I'll make sure to pause a little bit longer when I'm getting clarification from one of you guys or I'm answering any questions that you guys may have. Just realize that if you ask me a question, the timing is all messed up, so just be a little bit patient. Again, I'm alone, so I don't have a moderator tonight either, which means I will be going over everything there is to do with lipless crankbaits, and I don't really have anybody here to help me with questions. I do have the comment section pulled up, so I will be able to see your guys' comments, and I will answer them as soon as I see them, or let you know that I'm going to get to it, or ask somebody else if I do not know the answer or have an opinion on it. So we'll kick it off here. We'll get started. Hopefully guys and gals start making their way in. So again, this is SoCal Kayak Anglers Lockdown Live. If this is the first time you guys have shown up and watched the Lockdown Live, basically we are not allowed to talk about the virus. We already know what's all going on with that, but if we talk about the virus in the comments or I talk about it at all, YouTube is taking those videos down. So it is what it is. Basically, this Lockdown Live was created because of the virus, because we can't really fish except for in very few locations around Southern California. So we decided to create this and just have some open discussion. So open discussions on whatever we wanted to talk about. So that leads me into the next thing. I'm obviously not an expert at anything bass fishing. I'm not claiming to be an expert. Anybody that joins me isn't claiming to be an expert. It's just people that want to come on here and have a group discussion, open discussion on topics, and possibly learn a few things and teach a few things to other people that they've learned along the way. So basically just have fun. Hopefully you learn something while you're here, and hopefully this helps people deal with everything that's going on. Hey, Yak Bassin, thanks for joining. Appreciate it. So again, we're no experts here. We're just trying to learn. I did put in a lot of time going over lipless crankbaits, studying up on lipless crankbaits the past few days. So hopefully you guys will learn something. Let's go over the outline of how it's going to go. Again, this is lipless crankbaits. We're going to discuss everything and anything there is to do with the lipless bait. So that means equipment, the different types of lipless crankbaits. As most of you guys know, there are almost every company out there makes a lipless bait. Almost every hard company out there makes a lipless bait. They all have different applications and different strengths for certain things. So I'll get into a pretty good majority of them. I have a lot of them, and I've fished almost all of them. So I kind of have an idea of at least what I like to do with them. And then I've read a lot on why these baits were made, what the company's idea was behind making these baits. So we'll talk about when and where and why to throw it. And whatever else you guys want to discuss lipless baits, we can. After that is done and the lipless bait discussion has kind of died down, we open it up to open forum discussion, talking about basically anything that we want to talk about. So we can talk about what's next moving forward with SoCal Kayak Anglers. As some of you guys saw, Mark Chrisman is the president. He's been working his butt off to try to push some of these tournaments that are a part of our trail further down the line to the right, in hopes of, by the time that these lakes do open, we can get back to normal fishing and normal tournaments. So awesome job by him. I know he's been working really hard on that, as well as working, he's still doing his job. He still has to go in and work regular hours. So kudos to Mark and everybody that helped him along with that. That's really cool. Hopefully we'll be fishing here soon. Again, so for these topics, I've had some people message me that want to come on the show, which is awesome, but nobody was comfortable speaking lipless crankbaits, and that's probably because it's not a well-known bait, I would say, in the Western region kayak fishing community. And that has to do with a few things that I'll get into, at least in my opinion, I think I'll get into later. But if you ever do want to come on the show and join me, it's very simple, and I've got a pretty good format of how I like to do things, and feedback from everybody that's been on the show so far of what made their life as easy as possible. And hey, Greg, thanks for tuning in. So if you guys ever want to come on and talk, let me know, and we'll keep doing the vote thing, which has been kind of surprising so far. Each week, there's always a close second place, and then the next week, I think that second place is going to win the following week, and it doesn't. So last week, Finesse Fishing almost won and was barely edged out. So this week, I was prepared to talk Finesse, and then out of nowhere, everybody wanted to talk lipless crankbaits, which I fish a lot more than I do Finesse, so it didn't bother me whatsoever. Yeah, Steve did. I assume that Steve did a great job with that too. Those guys work hard behind the scenes, so pretty cool that they've made a bunch of progress in that, and I know that's been a headache. So again, if you guys want to come on the show, just let me know. Message me. We've got a few people in line, but they've given me certain topics they feel comfortable talking about, and then if those topics get voted on, I will message you, and we'll get it all figured out, and you can come on the show and just talk fishing. It's not hard at all, and if I can do it and come on here, anybody can do it. We all like to talk fishing, so let me know. Reach out to me on Facebook, and we can make it happen. Okay, so let's get into it. Lipless crankbaits. So believe it or not, I would say that I have caught my most amount of fish ever on a lipless crankbait, except for the square bill. So rephrasing that, the second most amount of fish I've ever caught bass fishing, which I've been doing since I was 10 years old, so 21 years now, has been on a lipless crankbait. I grew up fishing the lipless crankbait. It used to be my favorite bait of all time. My dad's from Michigan, the Midwest, and the lipless crankbait was a big player, for him. And he fished a lot of tournaments and things like that. So he got me throwing a lipless crankbait, which was probably the first bait that I ever threw in my life that I can remember. So growing up, I used to fish a bunch of tournaments in Oregon. The main thing that I would throw at these Oregon tournaments were lipless crankbaits. So I have fished them a lot. It's definitely slowed down since I've made it to Southern California, but it's only slowed down for a few reasons that I'll talk about here in a little bit. And it's nice to get back and kind of have a refresher on these baits and their capabilities, because now after doing all this research, I want to go out and start throwing them again. I've kind of like blast from the past. I've seen a couple baits that I used to fish a long time ago that I haven't thrown in years, and I used to throw in tournaments that I haven't thrown in years. And now I'm itching to get out there and throw a lipless. So hopefully that's after all this is said and done, you guys are going to give the lipless crankbait a shot if you've never really thrown it, because it is a great bait. So let's talk about the things that make the lipless crankbait unique. They can be casted a long ways. They're a good search bait, if you haven't really found the bass yet. So when the wind comes up, you could throw this bait against the wind, and you could still throw it 40 to 50 yards if you've got the right gear, no problem. That's one thing that I really like about it is there is no stopping you from throwing this bait and covering a lot of water, no matter what the conditions are. You can get that bait a good distance away from you, and you could bring it back, every single time searching for fish. So it covers a ton of water, number one. Number two, unlike a crankbait, it can be fished at any depth that you would like. So if you want to get this bait down in 50 feet of water, you can fish this bait in 50 feet of water. If you want to fish it in 5 inches of water, you could fish it in 5 inches of water. And you don't have to switch out baits to make that happen. Now, there are certain lipless baits, which we will go into, that fish better in deep water compared to shallow water, and some that were designed for deep water and some that were designed for shallow water. But again, there's plenty of baits that are made, lipless crankbaits that are made, that are built to do both, and we'll go over that as well. So they could be fished at any depth. They come through grass very well. That is kind of where the lipless crankbait shines, and it's why it was built. It's why it was introduced to bass fishing, was to get through the grass. And I'll just talk about why I think we don't really throw it a lot here in San Diego, and you don't really see them in this area, is because the chatterbait, the emergence of the chatterbait kind of stole the thunder from the lipless bait, because the chatterbait was also built to come through grass. It comes through grass very well. Some people say that it comes through grass better than a lipless crankbait, and I would probably agree with that. But the lipless crankbait can do other things that the chatterbait can't do, and we'll get into that later. But that's my reasoning and my opinion on why I think the lipless crankbait doesn't get thrown a lot, because the new chatterbait craze with the jackhammer, the thunder cricket, Picasso lures, I mean, it has won a ton of tournaments and has won people a lot of money. So it is understandable, but the lipless does have its time, and it deserves a spot in the rotation, in my opinion. And I'm guilty of not throwing it as much as I should in San Diego. Okay, there's multiple ways to fish the lipless crankbait. Another thing that makes the lipless crankbait unique is that you can burn it, which is kind of what it was originally made to do. It was originally made to be burned through grass, ripped through grass, and come through thick patches of grass, and drawing a reaction bite from bass. Nowadays, they make plenty of them that are fished on the bottom. And a lot of you guys have heard of these baits, and we'll get into them later, but more of a jigging technique or a dragging or a hopping technique off the bottom. So there's multiple ways to fish them, and again, there's companies that have capitalized on both, where they've made a bait where you could rip it through the grass and you could work it on the bottom. Some just make some that are worked on the bottom, and some only make some that are worked through the grass, ripped up shallow. Hey, John, thanks for tuning in, man. So plenty of different ways to fish these baits, and just understanding what each bait does will help you, feel a lot more comfortable. And we'll go over that here in a little bit of, which ones do what better. Okay, another thing that makes it unique is it can really be fished at any time of the year. Most of the time you hear about the lipless crankbait, it's fished in the springtime. That is kind of where it is thrown a lot more around the country. And the lipless crankbait is big in the Tennessee, Kentucky Lake area. And whenever their pre-spawn happens, that's when you start seeing them throw the lipless crankbaits a lot. And you start hearing the talks, the sales go up on lipless crankbaits around the pre-spawn as well. That's what I found out today. So that's kind of where you hear about it a lot. But I'll get into later all the different seasons and kind of how to approach throwing a lipless crankbait in summer, winter, fall and spring. So could be fished any time of the year. Another thing is it's got a lot of draw power. It's got a ton of flash, depending on what colors you want to throw. Obviously, it has a ton of vibration, and it's got a ton of noise. Now, you don't have to have lipless crankbaits that have a ton of flash, a ton of noise, and a ton of vibration. You could have some that only have a ton of flash, hardly any vibration, and they're silent. So that's another thing. You can mix and match any kind of, technique or attraction to fish that you want with the plenty of different lipless crankbaits that are made out there. So all sorts of different ways, all sorts of different companies make all sorts of different lipless baits, and you can capitalize on that. Whether you want it to be a hard thumping bait with a lot of flash, or you want it to be a silent bait that tracks more true and straight and is more of a wintertime lipless crankbait. So those are some of the unique things about a lipless crankbait that they get forgotten a lot, and it was nice doing this, researching all this and learning and remembering a bunch of stuff myself that I had forgotten about. Okay, so moving forward, we can talk about equipment. We'll get into the reels. So obviously, when lipless crankbaits were introduced to the bass fishing world, the reels were nothing like they are today. The bait is meant to be burned. And now, we have the luxury of buying a, 7-to-1 ratio, 8-to-1 ratio, 9-to-1 ratio. The Revo Rocket by Abu Garcia, I believe, is a 10-to-1, which that's a little extreme, but we now don't have to reel like an absolute madman to burn these baits. Let the reel work for you, and, that's what they're made to do. So it's awesome. Ideally, that's, listening to all the professionals talk about lipless crankbaits, most of them would agree that a 7-to-1 ratio reel is kind of that money reel. The one that you kind of want for all things, all different applications for the lipless crankbait. Sorry, my dog is making a bunch of noise in the background. So you want a fast reel for two things. It's going to be capable of burning the bait, through that grass without you tiring yourself out, as well as when you're jigging these baits or you're fishing them slow along the bottom. If that bass hits that bait and you're down in 40 or 50 feet, a lot of times it's going to take you a little bit to feel that bite, and you're going to need to catch up to these fish, as well as fish that hit it moving towards the kayak. So the 7-to-1 ratio reel is going to help you catch up with these fish and just make your life a lot easier. I have two dedicated lipless crankbait setups. Both of my setups have a 7-to-1 ratio reel on them. We can get into that later. Rods. So the rod is probably the most important. Hey, Aaron, thanks for joining, man. The rod is probably the most important piece of equipment into successfully hooking and successfully landing fish on the lipless crankbait. All the videos that I've watched, they go into extreme detail on having the right rod and making your life a lot easier. A lot of times people are throwing too stiff of a rod and they complain about losing a lot of fish on the lipless crankbait. If you have the right gear, you're going to make landing these fish and keeping them pinned way easier for yourself. So you're going to want a rod that's got a lot of parabolic bend. You want a soft tip. A lot of people will say the glass rod. A lot of people like the glass rods. The glass rods are kind of I don't know if I want to say they're fading out, but there's a lot of rods being made these days that are a graphite glass mix, and a lot of companies have kind of gone to that. There's still companies that make glass rods, but the graphite glass mix is kind of taking over, and that's the rod that you want. It's not a rod where you don't need it to be a sensitive rod at the tip. You need the rod to absorb the bite. So it's not a bait that you are going to jack them on. It's not a jig rod or anything like that. You're not going to swing on these fish or try to pull their insides out. It's basically they hit, the rod will load up for you, and then you're going to kind of swing into them ideally, and that's how you'll land the majority of your fish that way a lot better than using a stiffer rod and either one pulling the hooks out of their mouth before they even get the bait, or when they come up to the kayak and they start surging once they see the kayak and making those runs. You need that rod to absorb that for you. If you're using too stiff of a rod, you're going to lose that fish. So let the rod load up, let them hook themselves, and then sweep into them. Again, there are going to be, so the reason why I have two different rods for a lipless crankbait, it sounds extreme, but I use both of those rods for a different way of fishing the lipless crankbait, which I'll get into here in a little bit. Some are a little bit more heavier and a little bit more backbone to rip through grass and things like that than the other ones that are meant to jig. But that's further down the line. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, getting into line. This one was interesting because when you do the research on lipless crankbaits and people talk about the lines, everybody kind of has their own opinion on why you should use one line over the other. So I compiled a lot of the answers and kind of put together a new formula for myself that I think that, will help me. So I'm going to share what I learned going through all this research to you guys. A lot of planning for what line you're going to use for the lipless crankbait will be how you want to fish the bait. So if you're going to be around rocks and you're going to be more on the bottom or dragging it through rocks or hopping it over rocks, you're going to want fluorocarbon. All right, you're going to want to get that bait down there. You're going to want more of an abrasion-resistant line. So some people will say, what about braid? Braid with a fluorocarbon leader. You can do that absolutely because that will help with the sensitivity of getting bit in deeper water, but just make sure that your fluoro line has a lot of length to it. You do not want that braid getting into that rocks, basically, is what I'm trying to tell you. Fluoro's got the best abrasion resistance. So moving on from deep water lipless crankbait fishing to shallow water lipless crankbait fishing, that's kind of where the braid to fluoro leader is going to help rip that bait through the grass. Now, some people will fish a lipless crankbait on straight braid. I've never tried it. I don't think that in San Diego I feel like I can get away with it. Maybe at a place like Hodges, but I also probably won't be throwing a bait at Hodges, to be honest. So you can go straight braid. Some pros believe in it. You don't really have to worry about ripping the hooks out of the fish's mouth with straight braid as long as you have that parabolic rod. So that rod will kind of absorb it before you're able to rip those hooks out. So if you're going to be ripping it through grass, everybody that I watched and read about, they like to do it with braid to fluoro leader. So it made sense to me. It's going to help you rip that bait through the grass a lot better. All right, now if you're going to fish very shallow in 2 to 3 feet of water, and you want that bait to, let's say, run above the weeds, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, that's where mono is going to shine for the lipless crankbait. Much like a parabolic rod, mono has the stretch factor. So it's going to stretch for you on your hook set, and it's kind of working with that parabolic rod. So you could kind of send a harder hook set with monofilament. And this is monofilament floats. So fishing it in that shallow water, that 2 to 3 feet of water, and really burning that crankbait across, the top of weed beds, that's where mono shines. And that's where a lot of Matt Allen, Tim Little, tactical bassin guys do a braid to mono leader when they're going to fish it like that. So plenty of different answers I got researching it, but it felt like there was an application for each line, and it made sense to me on each one of those. Kind of hard to explain. Hopefully you guys understood what all of that meant. And if not, just reach out to me. I feel like I struggled explaining that. But basically each line has its own unique way to help you fish this bait to the best of your ability. Let's get into hooks. So hooks, EWGs, extra wide gaps, is what I use. A lot of the companies now have switched to EWGs straight out of the box when you sell the baits. Bill Lewis Rattletrap, 6th Sense has always done it. And if you pay attention to Matt Allen and Tactical Bass and Tim Little, those guys will say that you're missing bites if you're throwing it on an open hook instead of an extra wide gap. So for those of you that do not know what an extra wide gap is, that's the extra wide gap hook. As you can see, the tips will kind of come in, right? It's just like an EWG hook on a on a Cinco or on a stick bait. Now let's find one that doesn't have them. Give me 1 second. I rubber band all my baits, all my hooks together. So here's the open hooks that I was talking about that Tactical Bassin and a lot of the pros do not recommend fishing on your lipless crankbaits. Right there. So that is the open hook. Hopefully you guys can see that. Most of you in here, I know who you are, and I'm sure you all know this, but I never know who's watching, and I'm not trying to insult anybody's intelligence, but the open hook is basically better if the fish are slapping at it. And that's what all the pros and all the guides and everything, all the research that went into this said. But a lot of times, even those fish that slap at it will come off because they're not committing to biting that bait. So you can get lucky and still hook them and bring them all the way in and land them. But the majority of the guys said they want an extra wide gap because it is going to be easier to land that fish when they do commit to it. It keeps that fish pinned. And, I think the companies are starting to listen to that, and they're just starting to include the EWG hooks in the package so guys don't have to change out hooks like I do on baits because it adds, an extra couple dollars each time to every bait. So 6th Sense kind of started it, and then Bill Lewis with the Rattletrap, the newer age Rattletraps has started as well, which is nice. I'm not sure if the Red Eye Shad has. I don't think it has. At least the newer Red Eye Shads that I have bought by Strike King, they still have the open hooks. So I'll be switching all these out to EWGs. Okay, so I'll read exactly what I wrote down for the hooks. It says EWG trebles is mostly what the pros use, pretty much everybody that I listen to. The tips are closed, so it makes the bait harder for the fish to throw. The downside is a fish that slaps at the bait will not hook up as often as an open round bend hook. So, yeah, John, red front hooks. We definitely get into that. I've got a modifications portion at the very end, and we can talk about that. Tons of people believe in that. Okay, so let's go over that's equipment. And, we covered hooks, lines, rods, and reels. You don't have to have extremely expensive setups to throw a lipless crankbait. The majority of you that have a good crankbait rod for square bills are perfect for the lipless setups. I run an Abu Garcia Ike series, Ike delay rod, Ike delay casting rod, which is built for, He built it for lipless, but he even says that he fishes crankbaits on it a lot as well. And then I have a Dobbins Colt little $80 rod that Tactical Bassin recommended like 2 years ago, and I bought that one. And I use both for different things, and again, I'll get into that. But let's go over the different ways to fish these baits. So, first one I have down is jigging or hopping. This is kind of the newer version of how to fish the lipless crankbait that has kind of taken the country by storm in the past few years, which to me was introduced by the Tactical Bassin guys. And, I think it was even introduced to the East Coast a lot by the Tactical Bassin guys because they were a little bit behind on this method. But basically, you're going to let the bait sink down to the bottom. All right. Ideally, you're going to find a school. So this is the LV500. For those of you that know the LV500, it was already mentioned above. This is kind of the bait that gets talked about a lot for this technique. Goes down to the bottom. It lands on the bottom. It's 3/4 of an ounce, very heavy, but it's still a small frame. You get it down on the bottom. You get it near a school, and you're just ripping that bait up. It flutters on its way down, makes a lot of noise. Looks like an injured or a dying bait fish. It can be fished, aggressive with hops if you want to. It can be short hops if you want to imitate a crawdad. Short hops, smaller hops. If you want to imitate a dying shad, you'll go with bigger hops and let it flutter down. So there's many ways to do it. You can drag them nose down, feel rocks, and then kind of hop them over rocks real quick. You could drag them like a worm. Again, one of the unique things we talked about at the beginning was you could fish these baits so many different ways. And the LV500 was made exactly for that jigging technique. Now, I'm not saying that when I talk about these retrieves, I'm not saying that you could only retrieve the LV500, deep in 20 plus feet of water, because I have seen firsthand what this bait can do in shallow water. I don't think Mark Chrisman is on tonight, but I watched Mark Chrisman catch 2 fish over 19 inches, back-to-back casts with an LV500 in less than a foot of water at El Cap one time. I think it was like 2 years ago. So don't just think because it's a heavy bait and it's kind of made. Ideally, if you go on like Lucky Craft's site, which I was on last night reading about it, that's pretty much what it was made for. You get it down to the bottom, you work it on the bottom, you can hop it, jig it, drag it. It's almost like working a jig and or a bladed bait. So it's a little bit of a combination of both. Ideally, that's where this bait is going to shine. All right, and there's a pretty decent category of baits similar to the LV500 that were made more for that technique. And then there's others that are kind of universal, and I'll get into those where you can do both, and they excel kind of not as great at the LV500 as jigging, and not as great as the Bill Lewis Rattletrap at burning, but they could cover, 6 inches to 60 feet, and they do a good job doing it. So we'll get into those. The thing that you're going to look for those type of baits is these wide heads. So you can see how wide the head is right here. That's going to kind of give an indication and a clue to you that it's probably going to be a bait that is better jigged. So like the burning baits, right? So you want like a bait that you could burn through grass. So right there, a lot more slender head compared to the LV500 and a lot more slender body. I'll find one that's got really wide. So like this is the 6 Sense. That has dual. They had some creative name for it, but it was a dual width, and that's for extreme vibration. So talking about or reading about this bait last night, they were kind of making this bait to be jigged up off the bottom, which is funny because I think my most successful lipless bait in San Diego shallow has actually been this bait right here. So again, just because they say they made it for one reason doesn't mean that's the only way that you have to fish these baits. But ideally, if you're going to be jigging it off the bottom, you're going to be looking for ones with the wider heads, all right, the wider foreheads. The ones that have the narrower foreheads like this and the narrow, skinny bodies, those ones are going to be able to rip through grass and come through grass a lot better. And we'll talk about those baits as well. So jigging it, just like a jig. Why are you giving away my secrets? Tactical Bassin gave this to me, man. So I think I've learned so much from them that it's nice to pass this stuff along. And most of you guys that are on here, tonight we only have 6 people, which is kind of depressing. But most of you guys that are on here, or now 7, you guys know about the LV500 because most of us watch the same Tactical Bassin videos. So I've got some other ones on here that maybe some people don't know about, and we'll talk about those ones in the end. I'm going to go over certain baits that are very popular and then some that aren't that very popular. All right, so the next retrieve is what a lot of people call just the straight retrieve or the burning technique. You don't really want to do a straight retrieve, and we'll get into that here in a second. But the burning technique, complete opposite. You're looking for the baits that have, again, the narrower frames, the narrower bodies, the narrower heads, and those are built to be fished through grass beds, ripped through grass beds. So baits like this guy right here. That's the LVR Mini by Lucky Craft, and it literally says on the bottom of that bait, underneath the name, it says for weed cutter. All right, so I mean, it basically tells you on the bottom exactly why it was made. It is made to get through those weeds, rip through them, and draw that reaction bite. You're going to be, again, reeling these baits quick a lot of times. A lot of the pros we're talking about, they like to put it over grass beds. And if you could find that area where the grass will come up and then leave about 1 to 3 feet from the top of the water, that's the ideal spot to be throwing this bait, as well as the hard lines of weeds where it goes from, dirt, mud, and San Diego is usually mud bottoms, at least at lower otide, to where you could find that grass line and then fish the edge of that grass line, coming through weeds, ripping through the edge skirts of the grass line, and then drawing that reaction bite. So a lot of times, as Matt Allen and Tim Little say, it's that burn, 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 pause, burn, 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 pause. All right, on those pauses, that's when you're most likely going to get bit, but not every time. You get it on the burns plenty of times as well. So again, you're burning it, you're getting it through the grass, you're ripping it hard through the grass. This is where the rod's a little pretty important to help you out ripping it through the grass. You're burning it over the vegetation or inside the vegetation. Very, very similar, like I said, to the chatterbait. So think of where you'd throw a chatterbait. You can throw a lipless in that same spot. And that's why those baits kind of compete, again, and why you've seen a decline in lipless crankbaits, in my opinion, here in Southern California. So those are basically the 2 ways. Now, obviously, there's other ways that you can fish it, but those are the 2 ways where when you read about why these companies created these baits, that's kind of the idea behind why each one of these was made. Any suggestion on using them in crystal clear water like Dixon or DV? Man. We can talk about crystal clear water because I do have some baits that I would throw in crystal clear water over some other baits, and I have some set up that I can show you for that here in a little bit. But yeah, ideally this is a tough bait to throw in clear water, but you can do it, especially if you could find a group of fish that are suspended, and we'll get into that here pretty soon about fishing for suspended fish with it. And there's certain there's certain lipless baits that excel in clear water over the ones that excel in dirty water. And luckily I have plenty of examples to show you which ones that I would throw in clear water, only because that's kind of what they were made for. So I'll definitely get into that here in a second. We're almost wrapping this up, to be completely honest. All right, we'll talk about when do we throw a lipless. All right, so we'll go into each season, and then after that we'll cover baits. So that I'll help you, Brady, answer that question here after I cover each season. But again, the question, when do we throw a lipless? So like I said earlier, it can be fished at any time of the year. Most anglers, again, will say that the lipless is going to shine in the springtime, but don't be afraid to try it in any of the other months, or any of the other seasons. So I'll talk about the other seasons and go into detail on some more than others, but hopefully you learn something and it kind of gives you an idea of when and where to throw these baits. So summertime. Believe it or not, the summertime is probably my most successful lipless crankbait time, which a lot of people don't really think of throwing a lipless in the summer, only because there's so many other things to throw in the summer that people have confidence in. So in the summer, you've got a ton of things happening, right? Bass are post-spawn along with panfish, bluegills, crappie, and then as well as the shad spawn. So the shad spawn should have already happened by summertime. Bass, panfish, shad, all should have spawned. At that point, you're pretty much going to be focusing on color-wise shad, shad in San Diego and bluegill in San Diego. The crawfish patterns will kind of go away for you. Not saying that they don't eat crawfish, but you just had all those panfish and all those shad spawn, so those bass are going to be feeding up heavy. And for those of you that have experience fishing San Diego lakes in the summertime, you see them boiling up on shad in the morning all morning long for like 2, 3, 4 hours sometimes. So they're after shad, they're after bluegill. The deep ones will be after the crawfish, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But this is the point where I'm throwing baits that have a ton of flash, look a lot more like a shad. Stuff that I'm not going to be throwing this unless I go super deep in rocks. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But the bass are going to start to school up. All right, they'll be chasing bait, like I said, and this is where the grass starts to grow, and it's going to shut down certain areas of the lake to a lot of the anglers in San Diego. A lot of people will find those grass beds, and they will, fish a Cinco in them. They'll flip into them. They'll pitch into them. They'll throw a frog over them. They'll throw a chatterbait. They'll throw a swim jig. But a lot of people don't throw the lipless. And I was talking about earlier with that. So it was actually this one right here. 2 summers ago at Lower Otay with this bait, the 6th Sense Quake 70, I had like a 3-week stretch where this bait was getting more bites than anything else. And I'll tell you exactly what I was doing because it was summertime. So it says, with this grass growing, it shouldn't shut down your lipless bite. It's going to be a little bit difficult if it's extreme grass, which does happen here in San Diego in some spots where it's impossible to throw a treble hook bait into it. But if you could find the edge, like I was talking about, the edge of the lines, or you could find areas where you could burn it over the vegetation, or just sparse vegetation where it's little clumps here and there that you could easily rip the bait through, that's going to be ideal. Those bass are going to be held up in the grass, and they're going to be looking to ambush bait. So again, it's perfect shad imitation of this thing going across and just getting smoked. So what happened to me personally at Lower Otay 2 years ago in the summertime? I ended up finding, it was in Lower Otay Arm, and I found a ton of grass that was about 2 feet away from the surface. So it was that perfect spot to where as you went over it in your kayak, you couldn't tell unless you looked straight down. But from a distance, it just looked like I was in open water. Until you got over the top of it, you realized, wow, the weeds have almost come all the way up to the surface, but they're not quite there yet. So I just bought a bunch of these because they were kind of new, 6th Sense. I like the looks of them, a ton of flash. They just look really nice, and that's kind of what 6th Sense is known for. Excellent attention to detail on their baits. I mean, you even have the gills with the red paint and everything. So, of course, I bought a bunch of them, like a ridiculous amount of them, and I took them out and I started throwing them, and I was able to get this bait above that grass. And once I did it, I got bit and it was small, and I threw back, and then I did it again. And then by the third one, they were all small, but it was like, okay, something's going on here. People will say that 1 is luck and 2 is a pattern, but when you get 3, it's like, okay, I might be really dialed in on something. Nothing big yet, but it kind of should, the light bulb should go off. So I marked the spot on my Lowrance, and then I ended up I stopped fishing, which I know sounds ridiculous, but I remember I wasn't in any tournaments during this time. I could specifically remember that, and that's kind of why I went out and threw the Lipless, because I had no monthlies going on or anything, so I was just practicing. And I basically kept paddling down north on Lower Otay Arm, and I found out pretty much where the weeds were stopping. It was well over 100 yards, so it was like, okay, I have a big area here. I ended up marking that spot on my GPS or on my Lowrance as well. And then now I had this big stretch on my Lowrance unit where I can see exactly what line to run and where to throw exactly and get that bait above the grass and try to burn it above the grass and try to rip it out of the grass. So I started doing that and getting a bunch of bites. And again, I remember not catching anything of great size, but it was still fun to get out there, throw a new bait. And for some reason, it was like the one bait that was just shining. I did throw a spook over the top, and I did get a few bites on the spook, but I do remember that this was by far my best bait. That summer, for that 3-week period, it was just on fire. And then for whatever reason, I got hooked on the jackhammer the next summer, and I had great days out there with the jackhammer in the same area of the lake. But this year, I'm definitely planning on going back this summer. I've got a bunch of new lipless baits that I'll be showing off here that are kind of new to the market. And hopefully that pattern comes back. So don't be afraid to throw it in the summer. You just got to find the right areas. And I didn't get too crazy with it. I didn't throw it, deep down in the grass, which is something that I'd like to explore more this season. But it was definitely something that was kind of unexpected, and I know that in that area there was other boats there with me, but nobody else was throwing the lipless. And it's just something that is different for these bass, which here in San Diego, they're super pressured, trying to get a bait that they don't see a lot. It's got a ton of noise and a ton of flash. Take advantage of that high metabolism, take advantage of them needing to feed, and go out there and throw it. And you can get bit. I mean, it was working for me. I should have never have stopped doing it the next year like I did. But, of course, the jackhammer was so hot, and I was having a blast throwing that thing. So I would make that run, and then I'd turn around and I'd run it back. And I'd keep doing it until it just died down. But for about 3 weeks, almost a full month, it was on fire. When I would stop getting bit, so say that this one – is died down. You can always switch and throw another one, different color, right? This one's probably my favorite color because a lot of our shad here look like this color. It's got the purple and the little gold on the top, and then you can hear. All right, so that's the knocker version, and then I was throwing this one that was getting bit, which was BB's. So if this one was stop getting bit, I would throw this one, knocker version in a different color. I don't remember if I did really well on that one, but I definitely remember doing really well on this one. So switch it up. Has a lot of what the pros were saying. When that bite dies down, a lot of people will leave or they will switch baits. So what they were recommending was switch colors, go to possibly a silent bait. They do make silent lipless baits. Again, we'll get into that here in a little bit. Or even a smaller bait. Something like that LVR Mini can change your bite completely. So, think outside the box, show them something else, and maybe you can get that school fired up again. And I mean, you have to think, in that 100-yard stretch, there's got to be a ton of bass in there. There's a ton of bass in Lower Otay. Those bass go to those weed beds in the summer, and you're trying to throw over 100 yards. I mean, you could have missed a 7 and 8 pounder by 3 feet, So when you go back through there, you make a little bit different of a line on that same 100-yard stretch, and boom, you could hook up with an 8 pounder. I can, but you probably can. So that's the summertime. It was cool that I had a good example of myself doing well in the summertime here in San Diego, but honestly, that's the only time I've done well with the lipless. So moving on, fall probably the one that was the hardest to do research on, which to me it meant, okay, this is probably the time of the year where I will throw the lipless the least. And the same thing when trying to find the research on it. It seems like there's just so many other good baits to throw in the fall that the pros didn't really have a lot, and the guides that I follow didn't really have a lot of information on throwing it in the fall, but there was a little bit. So I'll read exactly what I have here to you guys. It says, in the fall, you're going to want to be fishing on windblown banks or coves. So again, most of us know, or if you don't know, you should kind of pay attention to, in San Diego, the wind usually blows 95% of the time in the same exact direction on the same lakes every day. Occasionally we get weird storms that'll come through and that'll switch, but like in lower Otay, it starts one way in the morning, and then by 10 o'clock, it'll completely switch, and it'll start to blow east, and then everything gets pushed to the back of Harvey's. So this says, the plankton gets pushed around by the wind, which the shad are going to follow, all right, because shad feed on plankton. A common misconception, and this was something that I had read about a long time ago, and then I was watching a video, and a guy said the same thing, was that the shad get blown back by the wind and they get pinned back by the current. That can happen, but a lot of times those shad aren't actually getting blown to the back of those coves. They're actually following the plankton that got blown to the back of those coves. And there was a guy that I watched a video on who studies all this crazy stuff about fish, and he was saying that a perfectly healthy threadfin shad is not going to get blown back by the wind and held back by current. It could swim through that current just fine. He said why they're there is because that plankton will get blown there, which can't, that just gets blown around wherever by the wind and current, and then the shad are going to feed on the plankton. So that was kind of something I learned a long time ago, and then I got a refresher on that last night, so it was like, cool, there's more than just that one crazy dude I read that from a long time ago that believe in that. But I have heard plenty of pros that say the shad get blown into coves. So who knows the real reason, but it happens, and it happens in the fall. So the bass are going to follow. Ideally, a lot of people are going to be throwing a square bill during this time. Like I said, other baits kind of get the spotlight in the fall. But you can throw that lipless up shallow. You can go to the lipless for tighter action. So a lot of the new craze, not new craze, but bass fishing popularities kind of come in cycles. So a long time ago, they used to throw flat-sided crankbaits a bunch. And then it kind of faded out, and then it kind of got into, the normal crankbaits that we know about. Now it's kind of making another loop back to where the flat-sided crankbaits are becoming extremely popular. So like the Frit side, for instance, that bait has kind of blown up and everybody is going crazy about it, the Berkeley Frit side. But, I mean, those baits have been around forever. That Frit side was just made recently because he copied a bait that's no longer made. And then you guys will see at ICAST this year, they're going to release a line of flat-sided crankbaits. And they're just bringing back the Rapala DT Flat series. That's all they're doing, but it's going to be fancier paint jobs, and it's going to be Ott Defoe's bait. And for those of you that watch MLF, Ott Defoe was throwing it when he just won one of the MLF tournaments here not so long ago on Lake Falcon in Texas. So instead of going to a flat-sided crankbait with a bill, you can go to a flat-sided lipless. The bass react better to the flat-sided baits, apparently, in colder water. That's the huge belief, and obviously we don't get too much extremes on cold water here, but the guys over in Kentucky Lake, they all swear by it, that, you go to a smaller, slimmer profile with a tighter action when that water starts to cool down, and you will get more bites. So reading about the fall, a lot of people say you can just go to the lipless. And when you're going to go to the lipless to throw up shallow like that in the rocks, you're going to need to go to a lipless that will fish nose down. And there's plenty of lipless crankbaits that fish nose down, that were designed to fish nose down. And there's plenty of lipless crankbaits that were designed to fish, parallel in the water. So you got to make sure that if you're going to do that, you're going to throw one that goes nose down. And usually if you read about these baits, it'll tell you exactly what it's designed for. A lot of them just say, it's a nose down swimming bait. And there's plenty of YouTube videos where you can watch that as well. So if you're going to want to do it up shallow in those rocks, make sure you've got the nose down. It'll roll up over the rocks just like a square bill would use its bill, and you're going to get bit on it. I don't really have a ton of experience throwing it in the fall. I never did it in Oregon where I used to fish. So this was straight just reading what these guys are saying. And obviously they're a lot better fishermen than I'll ever be. But again, this is probably the least popular season to throw it. So let's get into winter. Winter, as a lot of you guys know, there is a blade bait bite in the winter here in San Diego, and Steve has been like the master of throwing an ice jig down deep, jigging it off the bottom, and getting those bass to react to it that are feeding on those big schools of bait. Something that you can do besides that, right there, what we talked about earlier, the LV500. Get that bait down in the winter. Plenty of videos out there by Tactical Bassin on how to do it. Find those schools that are being ambushed by bass. Get this thing down there. It's got a ton of flash. It's got a ton of noise. It's very loud. It's heavy. It'll get down there. Rip it up off the bottom, and you will get bit. Tim Little on Tactical Bassin is like the master of using this bait. And he caught an 11-pounder on it a couple years ago on video, or it might have been last year on video. And that was all he was doing. Find those schools of bass that are feeding up on the schools of shad. Drop this in the schools of shad. You're probably going to need a good unit, or at least a decent unit to find those big arches underneath the bait. But if you ever need help with it, I'm sure Steve would help you guys out. He's like the master at doing it. I just don't think he throws, or if he does, I don't know about it, the lipless. So in Folsom, we had the Folsom tournament, and a few of us SoCal guys went down there. I ended up catching 4 fish. I finished 13th, and the only reason why I finished 13th and caught my 4 fish was because I found exactly that scenario. I was going to go fish shallow. I look down and I see a giant bait ball underneath there, and you could see the arches underneath it, and they were coming up and just slashing through it. So I marked that spot, and I ended up dropping what I had. I had 13 rods, and I did not have a lipless rod with me. I had plenty of crankbait rods because I was going to crank the whole tournament, but I did not have a lipless rod. Well, the crankbait rods would have worked. The only problem was I did not have any lipless baits. And that was, going back and looking at that tournament, that was the biggest mistake that I made by far. If I would have carried just one LV500, which I've done for every single tournament I've ever fished in up until Folsom, I could have dropped this down there, and I'm sure I would have got my last fish on it. Or at least, possibly got a bite. Maybe I wouldn't have landed it, but I caught them fast and furious, and then it died down, and I threw everything you could imagine down on them. And the only thing I kept thinking of was, I don't have a lipless crankbait, and it's probably the best case scenario right now would be to drop an LV500 down there. I did not have an LV500, so I threw everything you could imagine. I threw an A-rig on top of them, a jig, which I got one bite on the jig and landed it, and then the drop shot, the Ned rig, everything you can imagine. Deep running crankbaits. They were in 32 feet of water, and all I kept dreaming of was having this stupid bait in my kayak, in my little drawer, and I didn't have it. So I will never not have this bait in my kayak for a tournament again, and that was part of my big lesson learned. But the way that you fish in the winter is exactly that. So listening to what all these pros were saying in fishing winter lipless crankbaits was find those schools, get them down deep, work them slow. One thing that Tim Little talked about was when he rips this bait up, a lot of times he doesn't rip it very far up. He says that he'll only rip it up to where he could feel like 3 or 4 flutters, and then he lets it fall again. And most of the time they hit it on the fall. Now, obviously, that'll depend on where the bait is exactly and how relevant they are to the bottom. So, I mean, if they're 15 feet off the bottom, then yeah, you're going to have to rip it way up. But he likes, when the big bass are sucked down to the bottom, he doesn't rip it up high at all. He keeps it really low, and it's just short flutters, and then he lets it sit there for a while. And then short flutters, lets it sit there for a while. And then he'll even drag it. He'll just drag it along the bottom, just like you would a jig or a worm, and they'll come up. And he says that they come up and they just pin it against the floor or the ground, and then that's when you jack them. Not jack them, but that's when you swing on them. So you will miss some bites, especially when they're doing that pinning job. A lot of smallmouth do that. but have some good hooks on there, some big hooks, and you should be able to land some. So I'll read exactly what I wrote. Hop that bait through the school shad while the bass are below feeding. It's a great way to get bit. Now, most of this stuff that I'm reading, this is not from me. This is from all the research that I've done. I talk about, my experience with this of when I should have had it, and then a lot of guys throw the Silver Buddy or the Rapala Ice Jig, then the LV500, Jackal TN70. TN stands for tungsten. This is the TN70 knocker, so that means it's got a tungsten disc inside, and then this lip right here is tungsten. So this bait is awesome. I'm going to talk about it here in a little bit, but for those of you that don't know about this bait, I'll teach you everything that I know about it and everything I read about it last night, but I'm excited to throw it this year. I have caught some fish on it in San Diego, but I've done it a completely weird way that I'll tell you guys about here in a little bit. So moving forward in the spring, again, the spring is the most productive time to throw a lipless crankbait. The bass are beginning to feed up and get ready for the spawn. Large schools of bass will start to push shallow, and they're looking to feed before they go through the spawning process. So fish them shallow, fish them fast. The bass are going to be aggressive. The grass will also start to come up. So once you start finding those patches of grass, use these baits to your advantage, rip them through the grass. The spring is when those reaction bites start to shine. That's when these bass are getting super aggressive, and that's when you can get away with throwing things that aren't a drop shot or a Ned rig or anything else. Soft plastic. You could experiment a little bit better. For those of you that watched the Bassmaster Classic last year, Ep.4 won it, and he won it on a lipless crankbait. So I did a lot of research, which was Bassmaster Classic was held in the spring. So I did a lot of research on exactly what he did. I still have it taped on my DVR. So I went back and I watched it, and then I found a video last night on him talking about it and on what exactly he was doing. So I'll read to you some of what he said. He said, a lot of people were surprised by his choice of a lipless instead of a crankbait because it wasn't a grass fishery. So right now I'm drawing a blank on where it was. It was somewhere in the Tennessee/Kentucky Lake area of where the Bassmaster Classic was last year. I'm sure somebody here knows it. But most people were throwing Rapala DT series crankbaits. It was a rock fishery. And you're good, G-Team. Still talking lipless crankbaits. We're talking about throwing them in the spring right now. So talking about Ep.4 winning the Bassmaster Classic on it. What he said was he was primarily fishing this bait in rocks. He had the bait low and slow, making bottom contact, and was actually looking to get the hooks hung up in rocks. So this was interesting, and he kind of showed on the video exactly what he was doing, and I had no idea. He was throwing a Storm Arashi. I don't have a Storm Arashi with me. This is a Yozuri, but they're somewhat similar in how they both fish. So what he would do was, let me take the rubber band off the hook. He's fishing this bait in the rocks. Everybody else around him was throwing crankbaits. But what he was doing, you couldn't do with a crankbait, and he talked about this. You can keep this bait on the bottom, right? Again, this is the Storm bait, Storm Arashi lipless bait. You can check it out. It's all over Tackle Warehouse and everything. He actually painted it with a marker or had his own little custom paint job on it. It was very interesting to watch. But you drag it nose down like this in the rocks. It's dragging in the rocks nose down. He was trying to get his hooks to get stuck on the rock and hold his bait in place, and then he would pull up and back slightly, pop the hook free, and it would slide the bait over the rocks very quickly. Slide him over that boulder that he was stuck on, and during that process of when he broke it free to slide it over the rocks, that's when he was getting bit. So when people were fishing the crankbait, they were just doing the same thing against the same rocks, but they were going too fast. That bait was coming up over the rocks too fast, maintaining that speed, bumping bottom the whole way. He was wanting to get it stuck and then pull, and then it would slide over. And he said when it would slide over, that's when he would get bit. So crazy the attention to detail that professionals have, and that's why Ep.4 is one of the best fishermen on the planet, because I mean, who thinks of something like that? Who wants to get their bait stuck to where, there's a possibility you're going to get hung up and have to cut away or whatever, and you're dragging it over these rocks and getting bit. So it was pretty awesome video to watch. He said, the key was keeping it in those rocks and keeping it slow. So he was fishing a crawfish colored bait. He did a little bit of his own paint job on it, but it was still crawfish colored. And those crawfish are hunkered down in those rocks, and when it would come up over that rock, it would look like a crawfish, how they kick up like they do, 1 or 2 kicks with that tail. He was making his bait do that by getting the hook stuck and then popping it up over the rock. Again, the attention to detail by these guys, it's why they're the best in the world. It's just insane. The little things that you can do, the adjustments you can make to be the best of the best. And they're just so dialed in with this stuff. But it was cool to read that. He said he didn't want to pop it too high because when you watch a crawdad or a crawfish move, like I said, they only do like 1 or 2 pops, and they still stay relatively close to the bottom because they don't want to get up and expose themselves to a bunch of other predators anyways. So he was trying to keep it low but still get that good pop, and that's what was getting him bit. He said, again, all I was doing was imitating a crawdad, kicking up off the bottom, and when it becomes spooked, those bass would come down and hit it. So that's the type of stuff that, you watch these videos and you learn a ton. Obviously, that's pretty hard to do, and that would take a ton of practice, especially in a kayak, but you kind of just get inside their head on what they're thinking, and you could still fish the bait low and slow to the bottom. You don't have to get stuck and pop it. I'm sure just low and slow and then little pops with your rod can make that happen. But it's just another way to fish these baits that, how many people would have thought about that? And he's fished against the guys that are the best in the world, and it seems like he's the only one that had that dialed in, and that's what won him the tournament. So that's it for the seasons. Covered them all. Almost done here, and then we could answer some questions, especially the one from Brady. I haven't forgotten it. But the next quick thing was modifications, which is only going to take me a few minutes to show you a few modifications that a couple that I've used and a couple that I haven't used. But this was basically all the mods that I could find. And then there's one that kind of was introduced not too long ago by a kayak bass fisherman on the kayak bass fishing page, and I'll see if you guys saw that post like I did. But I definitely messed around with the modification myself, and I'll show you that here in a second. So, modifications. Some modifications you can make. This one is by Gene Jensen. He's not the only one to talk about it, but the first time I had heard about it was in his video, and I've actually done this, and I've done it with this bait. I already had it with this modification. So, that's a lipless crankbait with 1 hook. He throws 1 hook when the grass gets really bad. So he's down in that Georgia, Gunnersville, all those crazy places that he fished that are grass fisheries and some of the most popular grass fisheries in the country. He will take away his back hook if he's nonstop just pulling up grass, and he'll go to 1 hook and he'll rip this bait through the grass. I've done it, but I've never got crazy with it. I did it, I think, just because I saw the video and it looked cool. So I didn't really use it like I should have been using it, like Gene Jensen talked about. But that's something right there that if you go out there, you're on the kayak and you're trying to throw it in that grass, or even 2 years ago when I was doing it at Lower Otay, if I would have found out that maybe that grass is starting to come up and hey, it's getting a little bit hard to pop this thing through the grass, why not try taking off the back hook and throwing it like that? Maybe it will work. I mean, guys that do it say it works, so I'll definitely be trying it out. And I already did it to this bait, so why not give it the attention that I should. So another modification. This one I've never done before, but I know guys up in Canada do it. The first time I'd ever heard of it was from a Canadian professional fisherman. Awesome dude. He's no longer fishing professionally, but he's got some great knowledge on stuff that I know nothing about because he fishes in a different part of the world than I do. They're fishing on iced over lakes and things like that, stuff I've never done. So I learned this from him. He puts a blade on the back. Instead of having nothing like Gene Jensen has, he puts a blade. Now that's going to draw more flash. So if you've got a bait that you're getting slammed on, but you want to give it a little bit more flash because it doesn't have a lot of flash, you can just throw a blade. And all that is, you've got your split ring tied onto the back, just replacing, and then this is a Picasso blade. I've got a bunch of random Picasso blades. So I messed around last night, put that on the back. Some of you might have saw that modification that a guy made in kayak bass fishing. That's pretty cool. I'll show you that one here in a second, but this was part of it, half of the modification that he had. So that's just something to create a little bit more flash instead of, maybe if you want to get that bait down there at the bottom and like a LV500 off the bottom and you want to add a blade on the back just to create more flash and you're confident in those fish only getting that one hook, it's worth a shot. But the guys that are fishing for smallmouth were doing this a lot. And that was on, I think, Lake Ontario and Lake Superior. All Michigan lakes / Canadian border lakes, they were doing that a lot. And I was reading about it. And they swear by it. So something to try out. And then the last one that I have is, this one you can do to all baits, but guys seem to do it a lot on lipless baits. So as you can see there, that is 2 split rings, right? They double up on the split rings. Why would they double up on the split rings? So I don't know how good you guys are going to be able to see this, but a lot of people will lose fish because the bass comes up, he's hooked. If that bass spins, it is going to be hard to show you guys on video, but if I twirl this hook, I can get about half of a rotation before it gets stuck, right? Now, if the fish gets a little bit of rotation and it gets stuck, he's got a better chance of throwing that bait. And that's why a lot of times in big swim baits nowadays, you will see that the hook hangers will now swivel and go on a full 360. So if the bass gets hooked and he's trying to throw the bait, this hook can keep spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, and that bass can't do anything about it. But once they spin it and they get it knotted up, now they have leverage to throw the hook. So what some guys do is they'll do 2 split rings. That's going to give you an extra full rotation on this hook at least. So I'm still rotating. I got almost 3 rotations on that treble hook than I did on that front treble hook. The front treble hook only got about almost 1 rotation, and this one got almost 3. So you're getting a 3-to-1 rotation just by putting an extra split ring on there. And I mean, it's not going to mess up the action too much. As you can see, this has a smaller hook than the front hook, which these are old Normans. The company that makes the DD22s or the DD14 crankbaits, this is their old version of a lipless bait. They no longer make these, but they're awesome. I used to throw these a lot as a kid. This color is called Jelly Bean. It's one of my favorites. Imitates a shad. It imitates a bluegill. It's an awesome bait. I have a few of them in this color. Right? It's one of my favorites, so I buy it. They're not extremely hard to get a hold of anymore, but they don't make them. You can find them on eBay for cheap. They're a great crankbait, especially if you want to throw them through grass and burn them. They're not very well off the bottom, but that's a Norman. The double split ring thing, it's a cool idea. I've never done it, but there was pros that were putting it out, so why not put it out for guys that have maybe never seen those videos. And listening to them explain it, it does make sense. The big swim bait companies, they do make swiveling hook hangers, so the bass can't do that, obviously, because that's a lot of weight in the bass's mouth. And if they can get leverage on that bait, they can throw it easy. All right, this is the last one. This is the one I was talking about on the kayak bass fishing page that I've never seen anybody in my life do. And I thought it was pretty awesome. So, of course, I messed with it the day after I saw it. But I'm curious to see if any of you guys saw this or not. Take the rubber band off. All right, so what the guy did, and everybody kind of made fun of him, but I'm all about doing weird stuff like this to see if it'll work. So he attached the front hook to the line tie of another lipless, and then he put a blade on the back of the top one. So the top one is not going to hook the fish at all. It's the bottom one that's going to hook the fish. So what he did, what his thought process is that's 2 bait instead of 1. So now it looks like schooling bait is running away from bass. You're going to get double the amount of sound, double the amount of vibration, and double the amount of flash. Now you don't have to have one that's flashy or one that's got a lot of vibration. This is actually a little Yozuri bait that I thought fit good with a booyah, and he had it to where it was one. I think he had like a Strike King Red Eye Shad and a 3/4, and then a Strike King Red Eye Shad and a 1/4 or a half, and it was a little bit smaller. But people were kind of making fun of him, and I was looking at it. So of course I went out in the garage and did this, and then I put it on my rod, and I went to work, which I work next to a pool, and I ran it in the pool, and I was casting it, and I was pulling it along the side. It works 100%. People were saying that it was going to get hung up, it wasn't going to cast well. It casts a mile if I wanted to because it's heavier. So this is only a 1/4, the top one, and this one's a half, so it's 3/4. It's the same weight as the LV500, but I now have double the flash, double the vibration, and it looks like schooling fish. 2 is better than 1, so they say. So who knows? I'll give it a try. Once we get back out there, I'll throw it if I'm not in any tournaments and come back to you guys and let you know if it worked. But I'm weird into like modifications like that. I've got a bunch of different modifications for a bunch of different stuff that I'd love to show you guys later when we do more videos. But I'll try that out and I'll let you guys know if it works. Interesting idea. All right. So that wraps it up for Lipless Crankbaits. Now we can get into questions and anything else that anybody... I got a question for you guys. Does anybody throw the Lipless Crankbait? Anybody here watching actually throw it in devoted time? And if you have, are you doing any good? If you want to reveal the information, or you can. If you don't, that's fine. You don't have to. But I'm just curious if anybody else is throwing the Lipless Crankbait. Because last year... I don't think I threw it once, but 2 years ago I did, and I did well, and then I stopped. So, waiting for your guys' answer. Again, I'm well ahead of you guys. I'll get into Brady's questions. So here's what Brady said. Any suggestions on using them in crystal clear waters like Dixon or DV? So I haven't fished Dixon in forever, and I've never fished DV, but reading about crystal clear lakes. So for crystal clear lakes, what they were saying is you're going to want a bait that looks insanely realistic, obviously. So this was one that they talked about a lot. This is made by Miki. It's real transparent. You can see right through it, and it's silent. So let me cover up the line tie. Silent bait. If you're going to find schools of fish, especially ones that are actively feeding, you could throw this through them in clear water, and I guarantee you it would get bit. Or you can go with what they talked about was like a little bit softer of a rattle. So the Yozuri, this is called the 3DB, and then there's a 3DR. Yozuri makes it's a really small profile, which will be nice for those crystal clear waters, because a lot of the shad we have here are a lot smaller than most of the country. But if you throw something like this through bait balls and listen to the sound of this. So it's not very loud at all compared to any other thing that I have out here. These have a lot more BBs. The Yozuris don't have, so I could count them. There's only 3. They're in the head. I don't know if you guys can see it. There's 3 BBs and that's it in the head. So it's a lot softer noise, which... a lot more subtle presentation, a lot more realistic, and a lot less noise. That's kind of where what I read for crystal clear waters, you're going to want to go with that more finessey side of Lipless Crankbaits, which is those clear colors, less sound. But that doesn't mean that what they were saying was that's not how it is every time. Like bass don't follow rules. They don't, just because we read about it doesn't mean they read about it, So you can try things that look more transparent, more harder to pick up in that crystal clear water to see that it's a fake lure. You've got those crystal clear colors like this guy. But if they're not biting it, don't be afraid to try something that's a little bit more bold color, and something that sticks out a little bit more, that'll still get bit. Like, look at this thing. I've had this red-eye shad forever, and it has just absolutely been mauled. So I've done well with this one in clear water before. And I mean, it's got a blue back, a purple line, and a chrome bottom. That's not that realistic at all. And it's done its job for me plenty of times. So yeah, I mean, what they were talking about and what made sense to me was, if you've got a ton of bait in the water and you're trying to get your bait noticed, that's when you start going to a little bit more flash. You still want to make it a little bit more realistic, but stuff that has that little extra flash, maybe a blade on the back like that Yozuri, would be awesome to try it out in those crystal clear waters. But I mean, a lot of people, it's just not something that I think guys are going to first think of in their mind in crystal clear waters. But I think it'll work. And I've read plenty about it working in crystal clear waters. And I mean, if you've got questions like that, a lot of times I'll just put it in YouTube, like fishing lipless in clear water, and then hit enter. And there's probably been plenty of good professional fishermen that have done a video on it in the past. And it's just nice to pick up certain things that they say. But yeah, you can fish them in crystal clear water. Another good color in crystal clear water, that's the Ghost Minnow LV500. That's probably my favorite LV500 color. I got another one right here. My favorite Lucky Craft color. But colors like that, I mean, that thing looks as real as it can get compared to something like that. You're probably going to try the Ghost Minnow first and then go to the American Shad color. But you're definitely not going to be throwing, obviously crazy stuff like this in crystal clear waters. That's just not going to happen. Go to the more natural colors, and in those crystal clear waters, you're going to want to be moving it quick, right? So you don't want them to get a good look at the bait. You want to move it quick so it's more of a reaction strike from them. But I bet I've never fished. I've only fished Dixon once. I've never fished DV, but San Vicente is pretty crystal clear, and I bet if I wanted to, I can go out there, throw a lipless, and get bit. All right, John, he says, yeah, so fishing the mudline in San V. Right on, John. I remember that, actually. I remember you posting about having some good lipless days. You were going out there putting in the effort with the lipless crankbait, and you were doing pretty well. So moving forward, right, we've been on for an hour and 23 minutes. I knew this would be the shortest one out of all of them just because I'm by myself, and it didn't help that today was our lowest numbers that we've had. The most we've had on tonight has been 7, which is, it is what it is. Some guys don't really want to stick in it and be on here for an hour to 2 hours and talk about a bait that they know they'll never throw. But I'll definitely be throwing it. Hopefully you guys will at least give it a try. And like I said earlier, the thing that I believe the guys that are the best at kayak bass fishing in the country can adapt to any situation. So, if that means fishing outside your strengths, which I don't know if Shane is still on here, but Shane's been doing this lately where he made a hard bait video the other day because he doesn't really fish hard baits that often, where he only went out and did a hard bait challenge. That's the kind of stuff that I've been doing for a while now, just to try to learn other techniques, only because I feel like there's definitely going to be rough days, and I have rough days more than most people out in San Diego because I won't go there with a drop shot. What are the specs on the Miki? Give me 1 second. So this Miki was actually made be jigged off the bottom, but I will show it to you. I will get the info here in a second. So I'm pulling up the Tackle Warehouse real quick. And so I actually learned about that bait again from Matt Allen and Tim Little a couple years ago. they were fishing it, and Tim Little said that he loved it a lot. But there are more silent lipless crankbaits out there, so it's not the only silent bait. But I will get you the specs. Anybody else have any questions on anything related to lipless crankbait fishing? Once we move on from here, we'll get into whatever we want to talk about. But I'm going to pull this up real quick for Brady, and I want to see. I know it's bigger. For sure, it's a bigger bait. But one thing we haven't talked about, actually, I'll get to talking about it here in a second. I forgot. I'm going to cover some baits real quick with you guys. So hopefully no one's left. Hopefully you guys. So it's called the Miki Trimmer 65. And they do make smaller ones. They do make half ounces. It is 2.5 inches. The one that I have is the bigger version, but they make a 2.5 inch 0.45 ounce and a 0.5 ounce rattling and a silent. So that's why they're barely any different on size, but they make a rattling version and a silent version. I don't know how good that's going to pull up on the phone. Miki Trimmer. So you can find it, again, on Tackle Warehouse. You got any questions about it. But I'll get into baits real quick. Let's talk about baits. I forgot I did a bunch of write-ups on baits, so we'll get into that, and then we'll open it up to whatever we want to talk about. Hopefully you guys are sticking with me here. We still have 7, so that's good to see. But all right, let's go over some baits. I picked some baits that are very popular, and then I picked some baits that, maybe they're new to you, maybe not. But first one I have, Strike King Red Eye Shad. I'm sure most of you know a lot, or have at least heard about the Red Eye Shad. Where is it? There it is. All right, got that one there, and then I'll grab another one. Okay, perfect. So, Strike King Red Eye Shad. That's what it looks like. Very popular lipless crankbait. I think it was introduced about 10 years ago. Very, very, very popular. They've got a ton of colors. The thing that's going to separate the Strike King Red Eye Shad from any other lipless bait is the Strike King Red Eye Shad has a very unique action when it falls, and it's why it gets bit the most. When this bait falls, so if you're burning this bait shallow and you kill it, it's going to fall. When it falls, it does this like shimmy effect down. It's very similar to what a Cinco does when a Cinco falls. So a Cinco has that crazy unique, kind of bounce flutter action when it falls, and that's why the Cinco gets bit. They basically made this to try to do that same thing. So when this falls, it falls parallel. It doesn't fall nose down. It falls parallel, and it does this weird like shimmy shake thing on the way down, and that's what gets this bait bit. So I watched a video on why they created the Strike King Red Eye Shad and how you're supposed to fish it. But honestly, this is probably one of the most how would I say this? You can fish this bait deep and you can fish it shallow. It doesn't really have that specific designated area in the water to be fished. It's not the best at burning it shallow, and it's not the best at jigging it deep, but it can do both, and it can do both very well. So jack of all trades, master of none, basically, of the lipless crankbait world. I'll read exactly what I wrote to you guys. It's an all-around type of lipless bait. In my opinion, it is the best at any of the techniques without doing one very good. Again, jack of all trades, master of none. You could burn them through the grass, but they're not going to burn as well as a rattle trap, and they're not going to rip as well as a rattle trap through the grass. You could jig them off the bottom, but again, they're not going to compare to the LV500. But again, they're half the price of the LV500. So this is one that you can buy and apply it in 6 inches of water and 60 feet of water, and it's going to get the job done on both sides. The awesome thing is that it has that unique shimmy. It has that fall that other baits don't have. Other lipless baits don't have. Crankbaits don't have it. It's very unique in the way that it's made. So that's why this thing shines. That's why it's been a staple in the lipless crankbait world for 10 plus years now. And there's been, I mean, like, look at this one. Obviously, I have fished this one a lot. I'm sure it's caught me a lot of fish. You can see it's rashed up like crazy on the sides. So I used to fish these all the time. The Strike King Red Eye Shad was probably my favorite. I don't really fish them that often anymore because other companies have come out with other ones. But I guarantee you, if I want to get a bite and the other ones aren't working, I can always come back to this one and get bit. So great bait. They're very inexpensive. I would recommend you guys buy some. They do make, this is the original. It's old, really old. This is the 2-tap. That's a tungsten knocker in there. So Rattle, 2-tap. A lot different sound, a lot different pitch. Sometimes they want the Rattle, sometimes they want the 2-tap. Me personally, I always start with the 2-tap. If they're not biting the 2-tap, I'll switch to the Rattle. That's just me personally. So, great bait, Strike King Red Eye Shad. Check it out. It's inexpensive. If you don't own some, if you kind of want to get into the lipless crankbait world, it's a great bait to buy. Next, we've talked a ton about it already. LV500. Very expensive, $16 bait, $15.99. But it gets the job done. It's proven on video plenty of times. It's won a ton of money for bass fishermen all over. It's got a mixture of plastic and glass rattles on the inside with BBs. Makes a ton of noise. Super loud. It gets down to the bottom. It gets down there quick, and it does its job. It's very popular because of tactical bassing. It's made it all the way to the East Coast. Again, it's a heavy bait, but it's a small profile bait. So it draws those big, deep bites, and it just works. And again, like I said, I watched Mark Chrisman catch 2 giant fish, 3.5 4-pounders on back-to-back casts with this bait in like 6 inches of water. So you can fish it shallow as well. It's just meant to be fished deep. So again, those pull it up 3-4 flutters, let it fall, work it on the bottom. You can work it slow, and it's going to work. But you're going to pay the price for it. It's an expensive bait. So I'd recommend having one. It's probably my it's the top 3 favorite lipless bait for me for sure. I know it works. I'm very confident in it. So next is the most popular one, universally well known. And of course, why am I having trouble finding some of them right now? The Bill Lewis Rattletrap. Wow. Oh, there we go. Bill Lewis Rattletrap, right? Everybody's heard of the Bill Lewis Rattletrap. Most people still call every lipless bait that they own a rattletrap. Technically, it's not. That's the name of this bait, is the Rattletrap. Invented by Bill Lewis. This is the one that was made to be fished through grass. It wasn't made to be hopped on the bottom. When it falls, it'll fall on its side and flutter all crazy. It's not supposed to get bit on the fall. It's supposed to be casted up, and you're supposed to rip it through the weeds. It's got that slender profile on the top. It's made, the sharp nose, it's made to just rip through there and rip it through weeds. Very loud, a lot of attention. They make a floating version. Usually they're labeled floater right there. It says floater. A lot less BBs in it. Obviously, it's got a float. They make all sorts of ones. There's 97 different Bill Lewis Rattletrap colors. So, I mean, it's what they're known for. They're inexpensive. They work. They've worked forever. They've caught so many fish. Probably one of the most productive hard baits of all time in the bass fishing community. And like I said, the newer versions, so I did not switch those hooks out. Those are EWGs. Come on, there we go. Those are EWG hooks. I like this color a lot. Just, a simple color, real transparent. This would be a good one for that clear water, Brady, for sure. And you're just going to burn it fast. And, it'll work. Again, for those clear water places, I would usually throw in probably a jerkbait instead or a fluke. But you can get bit on these. And hopefully you got your answer on the Miki. But check out, just a Bill Lewis rattle trap as well, and just get a real, clear color and burn it as fast as you can. But meant to be ripped through the grass, still very popular today and inexpensive. If you're going to fish lipless, you're going to want a Bill Lewis rattle trap. All right, next, we've talked about it a little bit already. This is the Sixth Sense. It's really hard to say with a retainer in your mouth. Quake. All right, this is the Quake 70. Sixth Sense has done, they've been out a lot longer than people think. Believe it or not, I talked to the guys at Sixth Sense not too long ago, and I actually bought a bait from them that was one of the first baits they ever sold. And for some reason, I can't find it, but the guy that created Sixth Sense used to sell his baits from his dorm in college on eBay. I'd found his baits on eBay. It was a bluegill lipless bait. It was nothing like this one. It was way different. He built it himself, and I purchased it. I sent him a picture of it, and he said that was one of the first baits he ever sold. So I actually bought one of the first Sixth Sense baits that they ever sold, or that the guy ever sold. And he still had that name. He called it a Sixth Sense. I don't remember what the name of it was, but it was cool to know that I bought one of his first baits. And we just struck up conversation. He said he was in a dorm going to college and he loved crate baits, and then boom, look where he's at now. Now his stuff is amazing. But they've come out. They're kind of the newer bait company. They've got all sorts of different ones. And the one that I'm really excited about, we've already covered this one. Ton of vibration. It's got that dual flat body up top and on bottom, so it's just massive amounts of vibration. And I was working at shallow and it was working, but the colors on these things, like that one, I mean, that is just crazy realistic. This would be another one, Brady, you can try in clear water. I mean, look how realistic that bait looks. It's insane. And you can see I got line attached to that one right there. So Sixth Sense, awesome baits. Try them out. They come in a ton of different colors that are all awesome colors, and then they come in a ton of different sounds. So this is that's the Rattle. That's the Rattle. Come on. Here's that other one that I really like. Another good clear water bait. That's the Tungsten, the knocking version. And then now the one that I'm the most excited about to throw, and I cannot wait to throw it. Come on, find it. There it is. This is a suspending rattletrap, and I just messed that up after just saying that. This is not a suspending rattletrap. It's a suspending lipless crankbait made by Sixth Sense. All right, they have those crazy scale patterns. So basically, now imagine ripping this one through the grass, stopping it, and it just freezes. I think that's going to draw a ton of bites. There used to be companies that made suspending lipless baits, and I have one, and I only have owned one ever in my life, and it gets chewed up, and I'm always afraid to throw it. But that is an old cotton cordell suspending version, and it says it right there on the side. Cotton cordell spot suspending version. You can sometimes find these on eBay, but it's not easy to find them. Well, now companies are starting to bring them back. This was once upon a time the only one that I've ever owned. Now, companies like Sixth Sense are bringing them back with a lot better detail. I mean, you got that compared to that. What looks more realistic. Again, this one will come through the grass better. Cotton cordell, very, very cheap. Very cheap. One that I'm not going to talk about in extreme detail, but search cotton cordell, burn it through grass. It works, and it's super cheap. But now, suspending version. Sorry. One sec, guys. Can you let Rosie out, bud? Thank you. My dog's going crazy. So, back to it. Suspending Sixth Sense. Just type in suspending lipless. It'll pop up on Tackle Warehouse. They're brand new. Ripping it through the grass and then killing it. Or that burn, pause, and instead of that flutter down, now you got a bass trailing it while it's burning. You pause it, and it just freezes there. That bass is going to bite it. I'm super excited for it. Ima also makes a suspending one. That's another company that makes a suspending lipless bait. I don't own it. I should, but I haven't got it yet. But that's going to be an awesome bait. Next, And last but not least, one I wanted to share with you guys. I told you I would come back to it. Now I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Jackal TN Knocker. All right, so this TN stands for tungsten. You guys can see that lip. That is a tungsten lip. When this bait falls, it will fall and it will land on its nose just like this every single time. I've got a tank out in my garage specifically for baits. I can drop this in that tank every single time and it'll fall and land just like this and stand straight up. It won't stand straight up and fall on its side or anything. It has a 100% landing on the nose every single time percentage. I mean, it is amazing that you can do it. I mean, I could drop it backwards like this and it'll go shoop straight down and land on the nose. It's not extremely heavy. It's 5/8 of an ounce. Rosie. Sorry, I'm about to beat my dog. Go all Michael Vick status on this dog real quick. That was a joke. I love my dog. She's just dumb. Young lab puppy. All right, so back to this bait. I've used it in San Diego. I have caught fish on it. What's going to surprise you is I've caught the most fish on it throwing it on a bed. And it was actually at San Vicente. Notice how I got the bluegill color. I got the bluegill color for a reason. If you're going to have a bait that goes nose down, it's going to look like it's feeding. So I wanted to get a bluegill color because a bass is going to see a bluegill feeding and come up and smoke it. Well, I had this in my junk drawer on my new canoe pursuit, and it was just sitting in there, and I was bed fishing, and I was throwing a Kitech with an underspin. And the Kitech with an underspin was getting carried away by the bass every single time, and he was not putting the hook in his mouth. He was carrying it by the tail. So I opened up my junk drawer and I saw this and I thought, well, why not? I know I'm going to catch this bass. It's not big. I'm eventually going to catch him if I want, but let's see if this bait will work. Casted this bait in and it wasn't even in there for more than 5 seconds. It landed nose down. The bass turned, saw it, and just unleashed on it, and I hooked him. So then the rest of the day I decided, why not just throw this on beds the rest of the day? And I caught at least 3 bedfish on this bait. It's an awesome bedfish bait. Obviously, it's got the 2 treble hooks, so it's easy to hook the fish. They have a harder time spitting it back out or grabbing the back end. If they grab the back end, they're going to get a hook. So it's awesome bait. You just got to make sure that there's not a ton of obstruction in front of the bed. So that's the Jackal TN70. Check it out. It's very expensive. I mean, it's right up there with the LV500. But this bait, again, I didn't even cover this. This bait was actually made to go down on the bottom and be jigged and slow and dragged and all that stuff, just like the LV500 is. It's probably the LV500's biggest competition right now for lipless crankbaits that can do everything the LV500 can do. But it's got that nose down feature, and the LV500 doesn't have that. I mean, the LV500 will do that, but not as well as this bait. So try it on a bed. It's awesome. And try it for. I'll try it for deeper fish this year and see. But right now, it's been a go-to in my bed fishing box. So there's plenty of more. Booyah. This is probably one of my favorites all time. That is a cotton cordell spot, Excalibur version. Excalibur's not made anymore. That's a Jimmy Houston. Beautiful color, beautiful bait. I've had this bait forever. For some reason, that paint does not come off because it looks brand new. But trust me, this bait right here has caught plenty of fish in Oregon for me. And I was looking at it today, and there's a few little hook marks, but there's no paint chipping like the Red Eye Shadow. Yozuri makes a good one. The 3DB and the 3DR, really good, really smaller. So, I mean, there's plenty of them. There's so many. Another cotton cordell, the Normans, like I said. Yozuri makes the smaller ones. The LVR by Lucky Craft, smaller ones. Yeah, I mean, Bass Pro Shops makes one. My Bass Pro Shops, I have an all-black one right here. I don't even know if they make that one anymore. But this bait's really good for coming through the grass. Really slender body, really sharp, comes really well. So I got a bunch. I've tried pretty much all of them. This is an old homemade one. Me and my dad made when I was a kid. Had it for years and years and years, 20 plus years I've had this bait. Red head, white body, super popular back in the day. For some reason they don't make it anymore. Got it off, I don't even remember where we got it, and we painted it with nail polish and then put a bunch of glitter on it and threw eyes on it. That bait has caught me plenty of fish. I used to fish it in tournaments in Oregon all the time. So they work. Let's get into the question. So G-Team asked, that's a good question. What is my favorite bed fishing lure? But, I mean, what are your guys' favorite bed fishing lures? For me, I would say that my favorite bed fishing lure, and it's going to sound crazy, it is a Kitech with an underspin. And then I'll tell you something that Greg Blanchard just found out that I kind of don't like to tell people. But now that Greg Blanchard found it out, everybody knows about it. But Greg Blanchard threw a HUD on a bed in his most recent video, a 68, and he got bit. So I've been doing that a lot longer, and I'll tell you what I do. He's trying to get bit on it, and he did get bit on it. He lost his only fish on it. What I do, if I can't get a fish to pay attention to anything, if I throw a bait on there and the fish keeps leaving, and it keeps leaving, and it keeps leaving, and I'm trying new baits. I was out there one day, and I had a Huddleston with me. This was at Miramar. And I had a Huddleston, and I'm sitting there, and I've dropped everything on this fish's bed, and it's like, man, it was a little buck. It wasn't no big fish, but it was like, it's a bed fish. It's San Diego. You want to catch a fish before you go home, and I was throwing big baits all day long. That's all I threw out there. So all I really had was big baits, and then I had, I think, some Cincos with me. So I'm throwing some Cincos, and I can't get this fish to go. And I always have a drunk drawer of just random baits with me. So I'm throwing some of those on the Cinco rod. Couldn't get the fish to go. Well, I had the freaking HUD behind me, so I grabbed the HUD, and it's like, well, why not? I'm bored. I'm getting ready to go home. I dropped the HUD down, and the bass instantly comes over and just starts smoking it. I mean, it was an 8-inch Huddleston. It wasn't the 68 like Greg Blanchard was throwing. But he was smashing it. And, I mean, he was nowhere near to getting the hook in his mouth. But he was so angry at that Huddleston that I was like, man, that thing is pissing him off like crazy. Everything else I dropped, he didn't care. He would just leave. But the Huddleston got him super fired up. So I'm trying to, angle the hook to where when he hits it, he'll get the hook, and then I'll jack him. It's not working. So I'm like, well, at least that's cool to know that they'll strike a HUD. Well, then after I put the HUD away, I threw back in there with the Cinco, and instantly he smoked the Cinco. That entire time, for over 30 minutes, I had been throwing Cincos on his bed, and he was not biting them. Wanted nothing to do with him. I pissed him off with a Huddleston. I threw the Cinco back in there. He ate it, and I caught him. Ever since then, I have my own dedicated box for bed fishing. All of my wasted HUDs that I won't throw anymore for actual going after giant HUD fish, which I have a few now, of 2 or 3 that are just completely screwed up. I will now throw them on a bed when I can't get another bass, when I can't get the bass to react to anything, and it does work. For some reason, they hate a Huddleston on their bed, even when they won't bite a Matt Lures, bluegill, or anything like that. But getting back to the question, because I like to ramble, my favorite is a Kitech underspin, and I don't know why it works. A Kitech, like a 3-inch, 3.75-inch Kitech with an underspin. I just have a ton of success on it on beds, and it's usually the first thing I go to when I throw it on the owner flashy swimmer. So that's what I throw on the bed every single time. But ideally, I like to throw the Matt Lures bluegill on beds just because it's cool when they eat that thing. It's more fun. But that's a good question for everybody else. What is everybody else's favorite? The Nest Raider, yeah, that little salamander looking thing. I have one somewhere. I've thrown the Zoom lizards on them. That's actually in my box. I've never thrown the Nest Raider though. Now I might have to go purchase some of those. But makes sense, man. They get pissed off when the salamanders go over. The black Zoom lizards. So that thing looks cool too. I bet that's fun to catch them on. So moving forward, we'll do the voting again for this upcoming week. Hopefully the topic is something that guys want to come on and speak with me about. And hopefully we can get more people. Last week we got up to like 17, and this week we got up to 7. So I don't know what happened this week. Maybe it's because guys don't want to throw the lipless or hear about the lipless crankbait, or maybe because they're over it. They're over the Lockdown Live. I'll keep doing it as long as people keep voting, but I'll probably put something in the comments or something in the voters poll, like, if you're not gonna show up, then I would appreciate it if you didn't vote, because I wanna do shows for the guys that are actually here that want to watch, and I want to do shows that the people that are watching are voting on. If there's gonna be 20 plus votes every time, but we're only going to get tonight only 7 people, then I would appreciate it if, and I know that guys probably have stuff going on where they thought they were going to be able to watch it, and they couldn't. So I get it, and plenty of times where I've had plans to do something and something comes up. So I get that, but hopefully this isn't a trend where we start trending down. We were trending up on how many people were here, but now we're kind of trending down. So any other questions that you guys have? Anybody just wondering anything? Open discussion. This is the end. If you guys want to roll out, you're not going to offend me or anything. I'm already going to go cry myself to sleep because we had 7 people. G Team, are you still fishing right now? I know. What about San Diego people in here? Has anybody made the drives to Pudding Stone or that bait right there? That's the mini and bluegill. Awesome one. But yeah, guys, what are you guys interested in too? Let me know what the people that are in here right now for the remainder of you, the few that are left. What's the topic that you guys want to hear, or you guys want to see next week? What are you guys voting on? Heading to Castaic Lake in the morning. Nice, man. Good luck. That's world famous lake. I mean, some giants have been caught out of that place. I've been doing the tackle thing a lot too. I'll have a lot of stuff to. I got so many lipless baits that it's just. You guys can see my table right now. This isn't even a tenth of what I have. It's ridiculous how many lipless crankbaits I actually own. And this, I have like a table, and they're just everywhere on this table right now. Literally everywhere. I do have some tackle boxes too that have some, but there's so many different kinds and they all do different stuff, and I'm addicted to tackle, so I definitely get it. I love doing tackle prep. I love doing that kind of stuff. Hopefully you do good at Castaic, man. I'll be rooting for you. Well, I'm not doing anything. Watching the NFL draft. That's what I've been doing lately. My tackle stuff is done. I've prepped everything I could prep. I'm just ready to go. But yeah, if nobody's got any questions, we will roll out of here soon. And hopefully you guys vote. Let me know. Again, add topics to the polls. There's only been a few people that have ever added topics so far. I do cover pretty much every topic that I could think of to discuss. But some guys wanted to do like the paddle pedal motor conversation. We can do that. And they added that topic. And that was Larry Horn that recommended that one. So I added it, and it got second place this week and almost won. So again, feel free to add them yourself. I let that option, or I'll always let that be an option for you guys. And then this week there was another one added. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it was added, and it only got 1 or 2 votes. But keep adding them. Any news on when the SD lakes will open back up? Well, there's been progress on San Diego opening up certain things. For instance, names like yak bass and yeah, man. I thought people were going to want to talk lipless. Let me get to G teams first, but there's been progress on us opening things up, but the lakes is still something they're not discussing for whatever reason. So I'm hearing that the bay is going to open up. They're talking about the beaches are going to open up. There's been a million different rumors, like the bay is going to open up and you're not going to be allowed to fish it, but you're going to be allowed to go out in a boat on the bay, which makes zero sense. The beaches are going to be open, which again, everybody has seen what happened in Florida when you keep the beach open. It's going to be, everybody's going to go there because our weather's starting to get nice. No one's going to do this the 6 feet thing, and we're just going to set ourselves back. So nothing new about the lakes. It's frustrated all of us, and especially the boat guys. The kayak guys have done a better job of kind of keeping their cool, I think, but the boat guys and the boat forums and pages on Facebook, they're over it. A lot of them talking about breaking the law. I'm not going to. It's just going to feel that much better when we get to finally fish again. It's coming. We'll be out on the water soon, I hope. San Diego's at, we're fairly low on, cases and deaths compared to the rest of the country, or compared to the rest of the big cities in the country, we'll put it that way. But again, we'll see how it goes. Is G Team Gino? No, G Team is not Gino. Gino's in Florida. G Team, so this is funny. This is actually, we were talking about this the other day. Whenever I read your guys' names on YouTube, it's hard for me to remember who is who. But I believe G Team is NorCal Angler, who kicked my butt at Folsom and kicked almost everybody's butt at Folsom. Fishes with his dad. I watch his YouTube. I believe I'm talking about the right person. I think his name's Aaron, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't do names very well at all, so I apologize, G-Team. But, yeah, man, let us know who you are. And then Yak Bassin, right now, I know exactly who you are, and I can't think of your name. So it's like that. I do this all the time where I'm like, oh man, I feel bad because I call people by their YouTube names instead of their actual names. But I'm so bad with names that when I see people's YouTube channels, I can never remember who their name is. I just go by what their YouTube channel name is. But it's not Gino. Gino is in Florida. So you guys remind me what your name is, and by next week I'll probably not remember it because I'm so bad with names. I only remember my own kids' names. So I apologize for not knowing names, but yeah, G Teams has an awesome YouTube channel. I know that, so go follow him on YouTube and watch his YouTube channel. Oh man, yeah, man. Yeah, Anthony. So I was wrong. It wasn't Aaron. It's Anthony. Man, born and raised in Los Angeles. Yeah. So I believe I'm thinking of the right person. I have not got my motor yet, and who knows if it's going to happen, man. Honestly, so many things going on in my personal life right now just because of the COVID-19, where I'm getting ready to transition out of the military, and then COVID-19 happens. So now the military is possibly going to let me extend, but it's not guaranteed. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. It's such a crazy time. But it'll all get worked out. I know it will. It's just every time you feel like you make progress, something happens and it sets you back. But it's like, that's life, you know. So we'll see. It's going to happen. It's just when. But yeah, Bassin, I would love to have you come on and talk lipless. I feel like people are just afraid to come on and go live. And I mean, it is kind of weird if you're not used to speaking to like a GoPro. But I talk a lot at work. I'm an instructor in the military, so I have 250 students at a time. And I got to get up there and talk in front of them all the time, so it doesn't bother me. It's weird when you talk to a camera. I will admit that. You're not getting any, feedback from anybody. Especially when you've had a lot of mouth surgeries and a bunch of stuff with my jaws and a dead non-capped tooth in the front and all sorts of crazy stuff that's going on with me. So I'm not the prettiest person in the world. That's just life. But if you ever want to come on, let me know. There has been some people that have reached out. I think 2. You would be the 3rd if you want to talk about something. But, I mean, it's just nice to hear other people's stories and success on what they've done, because it's always going to be different than mine. And it's like when I do this stuff where I talk about the pros a lot, it's cool. But I think it's different when we get guys that are local that aren't pros, but they've found their own kind of success at whatever we're talking about. And it's like, hey, that guy's been here. He's going to kayak with me. It's easy to say that Kevin Van Dam could go wreck him on a lipless because, I mean, he's Kevin Van Dam or Hot Defoe. So, yeah, man. G-Team, that's tough. Greg Blanchard can talk to his camera while people are staring at him. I can't do that. He's also just an upbeat person. And I'm not a super upbeat person. I'm not. I have I'm monotoned. I do like to joke a lot. I mean, I joke way more than I ever should. But on camera, it's a little bit different when you're not joking with somebody. So it's kind of hard to joke into a camera. But yeah, that's something that he's mastered, and I'll never master it. But again, it's fun just to film and watch yourself and learn. I talked about on an earlier episode, I've learned more by watching myself fish than probably anything else. Pick up a lot of things that you didn't even catch. But, yeah, if any one of you ever want to come on, hopefully we get more people. Hopefully we can get more guys to watch. And then we get those more guys to watch. You get more interaction. The more interaction, the better the conversations get. Rather than right now, it's just 3 of us that are mainly talking, and we're kind of just searching for stuff to talk about. It's a lot better when we get 17 like we had the other day, where it was easy to talk, and we went for 2+ hours was super easy. And I felt like this week I did a better job of preparing, getting everything on time, and then we didn't have as many people. So it's like, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But there was some new people that I didn't recognize, at least in the comments this week. Brady asked a question. Nice. Danny, I appreciate that, man. I didn't even know you were on here. But yeah, let me know, Danny. If you want to chat, we can chat. Whether that be just on here. I'm not sure if you mean on here or you're going to personal message me or something. But yeah, we could talk about your rods, man. We can get you on here and just talk about your rods. And that would be a great show. I'm sure a bunch of people would tune in and want to know. Because I don't know a lot about your rods either. And I am a rod whore. I have every kind of different rod there is. I'm not one of those guys that's dedicated to one company, and I'm not one of those guys that's dedicated to one real company. I just explore in rods, and I explore in reels, and I want to try them all, and then I kind of want to create my own. It's the same thing I do with baits. I buy every one, and then I find my favorites. So yeah, I mean, if you see my rod and reel collection, one day I'll do a YouTube video on it. It's not huge, but it's just scattered like crazy. I mean, it's every brand. So, and I've found certain brands I do better at certain styles. So yeah, we could have you come on and just talk about your line of rods. That'd be awesome. I'd love to do that. I'd love to help people out like that for sure. That'd be a cool episode. So, yeah, if you want to do that, we can do that. Easy. I'm sure a lot of guys would vote for it too. Or even get on here and talk about your kayak, the most ridiculous kayak and kayak bass fishing. Oh, my bad, Mark. Then I'm way off, man. Mark Chrisman is Yak Bassin TV. I'm sorry, Mark. I had no idea that was you. That's hilarious. Well, then now I'm all confused because I'm thinking of somebody else thinking it's you. Um, Dude, good job today getting those tournaments set up. I don't know how long you've been with us, Mark, but we talked about that. Pushing those tournaments to the right and everything. But yeah, I can't believe it's you this whole time. The trails are open. That's true, Mark? The trails are open, huh? Dude, if the trails are open, let's go fishing. Let's go to Ramona. Yeah, we can do that. We'll talk later. Sorry, Mark. You messaged me on Messenger and I just saw it. So, Yak Bassin's Mark. So I'm way off, man. Let's put something together. I'll message you. Yeah, Danny. We can do that for sure. That'd be cool, man. Just I want to know more about your rods. I know other guys want to know more about them because I don't know hardly anything. And my stimulus check could pay for it. But yeah, there's only three people on here. I'm probably gonna get off. We've been going for 2 hours. I appreciate everybody that stuck around. Feel free to message me on Facebook if you want to ask questions or set anything up. But yeah, appreciate you guys tuning in. Remember, help out the little guys. Our sponsorships, everything up top above my big old ugly dome right now is the all our sponsors. I'll expand it out here, give you guys a better look at who they are, help them out to the best that you guys can because they help us out. And yeah, Mark, let's do it, Lake Ramona, for sure. We can set that up. Yeah, we can talk. G Team's got a good point, man. We can get Danny on and talk about how he whooped us all. Good job, man. I wish I'm dying not being able to fish the monthlies, but that's cool to see that you got that win. But again, there's the sponsors, guys. I appreciate you guys tuning in for 2 hours and listening to this. It was not the most people that I thought I expected, so that was a little bit disappointing. I hope the discussion was good for you guys. I hope somebody took something away from it. Again, even if you didn't, just reading this stuff about lipless baits got me excited to throw them again. So I'll be throwing them again, especially that guy right there, that suspended one. I'm really looking forward to throwing it. Let me know how it goes if you guys go out there and throw it, unless you're on a 30-pound bag and you don't want to share it. I understand. I'm gonna get out of here. You guys enjoy your weekend, and again, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Mark, let me know if you want to head to Ramona. We can go finish, or we can go fish, for sure. But let me know if you guys want to add some options on the Facebook page. Go ahead and do it, but make sure to vote for the second one. And hopefully I see you guys back here next week. Later.